On a frigid December night in 2005, Bloomington, Indiana lay buried under a thick quilt of snow. The kind of night when the air itself feels sharp enough to cut, when headlights vanish into swirling white, and the silence of the county roads is broken only by the wind clawing through the bare trees. In that silence, a young mother named Emily Harper stepped out of a small bar, cheeks flushed from the cold, her thin red coat a fragile shield against winter's bite. She was 29, a single mom fighting to give her 7-year-old son a future, unaware that she was walking straight into the shadows of a nightmare. Security cameras at a Marathon gas station captured her last living moments, fumbling with the fuel pump, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if some unseen presence lingered just beyond the snow. The Pontiac Grand Am's headlights cut into the night, then dissolved into the black, swallowed whole by the icy roads of Monroe County. And just like that, Emily Harper was gone. No skid marks, no broken glass, no trace of her silver Pontiac. For nearly 2 decades, Bloomington asked the same question. How can a woman and her car simply vanish into thin air? Rumors whispered in churches and coffee shops. Was it an accident, an escape, or something far darker? Families shuddered, because if Emily could disappear, so could anyone. In the world of true crime cases, mysteries like this refused to stay buried. 18 winters passed, until one day, when modern technology forced Lake Monroe to give up its secret, revealing a truth that stunned a community and unmasked a man who had been hiding in plain sight. Before we uncover how technology exposed a killer cloaked as a hero, subscribe and stay with us. Justice may come late, but you'll want to see how it finally arrived. Emily Harper was not the kind of woman who usually made headlines. To most in Bloomington, she was simply the young cashier at the grocery store who always smiled politely, the mother who walked her son to elementary school with a tired but determined face. Behind her, modest life was a woman carrying burdens heavier than most could imagine. Divorced at 27, raising a child on her own, working double shifts, and still managing to show up for her son's school plays, Emily embodied a fragile resilience. She was not a fighter in the traditional sense, but survival had made her stronger than she looked. On December 10th, 2005, that resilience was put to its harshest test. It was Emily's 29th birthday. Friends had insisted she take a break from her exhausting routine, to come out for one night of laughter and celebration. At a small neighborhood bar, tucked along Kirkwood Avenue, the glow of neon lights spilled into the snow-covered street. Inside, warmth and chatter contrasted the cold night pressing against the windows. Emily laughed with coworkers, her cheeks flushed not just from the bitter air outside, but from the bittersweet acknowledgement of another year of struggle behind her. Witnesses would later remember her modest red coat, too thin for the single-digit chill, and the way she glanced at her watch, murmuring that she couldn't stay late because she had to pick up groceries for her son in the morning. She left the bar just before midnight, her high heels clicking sharply against the icy sidewalk. To those inside, it was an ordinary departure. To her family, it would become the last time anyone saw her alive. At 11:56 p.m., Emily's silver Pontiac Grand Am rolled into the Marathon gas station on Route 46. Grainy surveillance footage captured the moment with haunting clarity. She parked beside the pump, opened her coat against the cutting wind, and began fueling her car. The camera showed her glancing around, shoulders tense. Some investigators would later suggest she looked paranoid, as if she sensed eyes on her. Others argued she was simply cold, rushing through the motions. Still, the unease in her movements was undeniable. When the pump clicked full, Emily replaced the nozzle, tugged her coat tighter, and slipped into the driver's seat. For a moment, her face was illuminated by the glow of the marathon sign. She looked exhausted, as though the weight of her day, of her life, pressed heavily on her. Then the headlights cut across the snow. The Pontiac rolled out of the frame, and Emily Harper vanished into the winter night. That 2-minute tape, blurry and pixelated, would become the last verifiable evidence of her existence. Beyond that, there were no witnesses, no signs of trouble. It was as if the darkness itself had swallowed her whole. By morning, the silence began to speak. When Carolyn, her mother, tried calling Emily's phone, she was met only with the endless ring of an unanswered line. At first, she told herself Emily might be sleeping in, or perhaps her phone battery had died. But as hours ticked by, that comfort collapsed. Emily's sister, Rachel, stopped by with groceries and grew alarmed when Emily never showed up to pick up her son as promised. Panic spread quickly through the Harper household. A flurry of phone calls to friends and coworkers yielded the same answer. No one had seen her since the party. Hospitals confirmed she hadn't been admitted. No one had driven her home. By afternoon, Carolyn's trembling hands dialed the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. Deputies arrived and began piecing together her last known movements. Friends confirmed she had been sober when she left the bar. Surveillance confirmed she had fueled her car. But where had she gone next? Patrol cars canvassed the roads near Lake Monroe. Snow made the search treacherous. Tire tracks blurred into indistinguishable patterns. Deputies knocked on doors, hoping for someone who might have seen a silver Pontiac sliding across the icy county roads. But Bloomington is not a city that stays awake past midnight. Most neighbors had been asleep. The following day, divers from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources descended into the frigid waters of Lake Monroe. Locals called the reservoir the Swallowing Belly, a place that had claimed more than a few cars during winter storms. The divers' black suits disappeared beneath the surface, bubbles breaking the water as their searchlights cut through the murky depths. For hours they combed the lakebed, dragging cables, sending up debris, surfacing only to shake their heads. There was no sign of the Pontiac. At the same time, volunteers stapled missing person flyers across Bloomington. Emily's photo, brown hair, warm eyes, gentle smile, looked back from every utility pole, every cafe window, every bulletin board. Her image became inescapable, a reminder that a young woman had walked out into the night and never come home. Whispers began to swirl. Some speculated she might have skidded off an icy road into one of the region's abandoned quarries, whose water-filled depths were notorious for swallowing cars whole. Others whispered about her ex-husband, their rocky history a convenient suspicion. And still others cast side-eyes toward her new boyfriend, painting him as controlling and jealous. As each theory grew, so did the unease. In supermarkets and coffee shops, parents lowered their voices. If Emily could disappear, what about my daughter? Churches held quiet vigils, praying for her safe return. In schoolyards, children whispered among themselves, repeating what they overheard from adults, trying to understand how one of their classmates could suddenly be without a mother. Psychologists often note that disappearances like Emily's ignite a primal fear in a community, the terror of being erased without explanation. A murder is horrifying, but it brings closure. A voluntary departure is painful, but at least it explains abandonment. But when a single mother vanishes without a trace, it unsettles every instinct of safety. Neighbors ask, would a mother really leave her child? Or did something malicious happen? That duality, abandonment versus victimhood, creates a vacuum filled by rumor, guilt, and suspicion. For the Harpers, the effect was devastating. Carolyn, once a pillar of quiet strength, began to unravel. She clutched Emily's photo through sleepless nights, eyes swollen from tears. Rachel grew combative, snapping at neighbors who whispered that Emily might have run away to escape responsibility. And Emily's 7-year-old son, confused and terrified, began waking in the night, clutching his stuffed animal and crying for his mom. His innocent question, "Where is she?" was one no adult could answer. Within 5 days, investigators had exhausted the most obvious leads. No skid marks, no body, no car. Maps marked with red pins grew dense, yet empty of results. A veteran deputy muttered the words that would echo for years. "It's like chasing a ghost in a snowstorm." That ghost would haunt Bloomington for nearly 2 decades. Emily's name faded from the police whiteboard, but in her family's home, the candle in the window stayed lit, a small flame against an overwhelming darkness. And that's why, in the landscape of true crime cases, Emily Harper's disappearance became one of the most chilling. Not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. Silence screamed louder than evidence. The absence of clues became the most terrifying clue of all. If you believe unsolved cases like this deserve justice, leave a comment. Number 1. The morning after Emily Harper's disappearance, Bloomington woke under another blanket of snow. To the average resident, it was just another cold December day. But to the Harper family, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would stretch far beyond anyone's imagination. By 8 a.m., Carolyn had already called every local hospital, every friend, every coworker she could think of. Rachel drove through icy streets, retracing the route from the bar to the gas station, hoping to see tire tracks or some overlooked clue. None appeared. The roads looked deceptively untouched, as if Emily had never traveled them. Within hours, the Monroe County Sheriff's Office classified the case as urgent. Patrol cars combed county highways, yellow lights flashing as deputies scanned ditches, bridges, and guardrails. They searched for the glint of twisted metal, the shimmer of broken glass. Snow, however, erased everything. Tracks vanished within minutes, as if the storm conspired to hide every sign of Emily's path. By midday, divers from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources arrived at Lake Monroe. The reservoir stretched like a frozen expanse, its surface hiding dark depths that locals feared. Clad in black neoprene suits, the divers braved the frigid water. Each splash echoed like a drumbeat of desperation. They descended into the lake's murky belly, light sweeping through water thick with silt. For hours, they scoured the lake bed, their breath rising in bubbles, ropes straining, yellow buoys bobbing in the distance. When they resurfaced, their verdict was a simple shake of the head. No car, no body. No trace. Meanwhile, volunteers poured into Bloomington streets. Friends stapled missing posters onto utility poles. Emily's brown-haired, smiling face stared from every grocery store entrance, every church bulletin board, every gas station window. Her photo, surrounded by the words "missing," became impossible to ignore. Some volunteers canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors. Did you see a silver Pontiac? Did you notice a young woman in a red coat? Most residents shook their heads. A few mentioned seeing headlights along county roads, but none could be certain. The search grew frantic, but each hour stretched the silence deeper. And then came the whispers. Rumors spread faster than the posters. Some pointed fingers at Emily's ex-husband, claiming their fights had been heated in the weeks before. Others accused her new boyfriend, painting him as controlling, jealous, unwilling to let Emily live freely. In diners and church pews, people muttered that maybe Emily had simply run away, leaving the burdens of motherhood behind. She was young, someone whispered at a grocery store checkout. Maybe she just wanted a new life. Eights for the Harper family. Those whispers were daggers. Rachel lashed out when a coworker suggested Emily might have chosen to vanish. She would never leave her son. She snapped, slamming her fist against the break room table. Carolyn, quieter but equally resolute, told anyone who would listen. My daughter loved her boy more than life itself. She didn't leave. Something happened. Eights. But rumors have a way of feeding themselves, growing louder than the truth. In the absence of evidence, speculation became the town's obsession. Some neighbors began locking doors earlier. Parents warned daughters not to drive alone at night. Fear had crept into Bloomington, wrapping itself around the entire community. Imagine waiting for your sister's phone to ring, night after night, knowing deep down she would never call again. Imagine clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would walk back through the door, even as the days turned into weeks. That was the reality for Rachel, her knuckles white from gripping her phone, red-eyed from sleepless nights, dialing the same number over and over. Psychologists later noted that cases like Emily's expose a primal fear within communities. Murder leaves evidence. Abandonment leaves motive. But a disappearance leaves only questions, and questions become unbearable over time. Was Emily a victim, or had she chosen to leave? That uncertainty gnawed at the Harpers, splitting them from the community they once trusted. By the fifth day, investigators admitted their search had hit a dead end. No skid marks, no Pontiac, no Emily. A deputy told reporters, "It's like chasing a ghost in a snowstorm." Eights, inside the Harper home, despair grew heavier. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table, holding Emily's framed photo, her eyes swollen from crying. Rachel refused to accept defeat, driving every back road near Lake Monroe, her sister's photo riding shotgun, asking bartenders and gas station attendants if they had seen her. Emily's 7-year-old son clutched his stuffed animal by the window, watching every car that passed, whispering, "Maybe that's Mom." But the driveway remained empty. Volunteers kept the search alive. Churches organized prayer vigils, candles flickering in the winter air. But even hope has limits. As the second week passed, fewer volunteers showed up. Flyers grew tattered, snow soaking the paper until the ink ran. Some residents shifted from compassion to resignation. If she's gone, she's gone, someone murmured at a diner. For the Harper family, resignation was impossible. Every rumor, every whisper of doubt felt like betrayal. And yet, their agony wasn't unique. In the world of true crime cases, early searches often begin with passion and energy, but fade into silence when no answers appear. Families are left holding the weight of hope alone, begging strangers to care as much as they do. The Monroe County Sheriff's Office officially scaled back the search by the end of the second week. Divers were withdrawn, patrol cars reassigned. What had once been an urgent mission became a cold file on a crowded desk. Emily Harper was declared a missing person, foul play suspected. 4 words that sounded more like surrender than justice. Rachel's anger boiled over. She drove to the sheriff's office, demanding answers. "How can you stop?" she shouted through tears. She didn't just vanish. Someone knows something. The deputy on duty lowered his eyes, unable to offer comfort. For him, it was another case filed away. For Rachel, it was her sister, her best friend, gone without a trace. At night, Carolyn lit a candle by the window, a signal to Emily, should she ever find her way home. It became ritual, a flickering symbol of resistance against despair. Neighbors sometimes saw the light from the road, a reminder that the Harper family refused to give up. The boy began asking harder questions. "Grandma, where's Mom? Why hasn't she come back?" Carolyn's voice cracked as she tried to answer, telling him, "She's lost, honey, but we're still looking." He nodded, unconvinced, the innocence in his eyes dimming with each passing day. Meanwhile, speculation grew darker. People whispered that Emily had been murdered and hidden. Others suggested her car was at the bottom of a quarry, forever unreachable. Fear morphed into folklore. The story of Emily Harper became more than a tragedy. It became a ghost story, Bloomington told itself, especially on cold nights when headlights cut across snowy county roads. Rachel clung to determination, even as exhaustion consumed her. Each time she knocked on a door, each time she showed Emily's photo to a stranger, she felt the sting of disbelief in their eyes. But for her, persistence was survival. Stopping meant accepting Emily was gone forever, and that was a reality she refused to face. By the end of the month, the community's attention had shifted. Holidays came and went. New headlines filled the local papers. But in the Harper household, the silence remained deafening. Every night, the phone stayed quiet. Every day, Emily's seat at the table stayed empty. And in that silence, fear grew, not just for the Harpers, but for every family in Bloomington. Because if Emily Harper could disappear without a trace, then so could anyone. That is why her case lingered, a wound the town couldn't heal. In the long history of true crime cases, Emily stood out because it left behind nothing, no body, no car, not even a single clue that could explain the unexplainable. It was absence that became the evidence, and silence that screamed the loudest. Before we move forward, I want to hear from you. If you feel this story deserves to be told, leave a comment right now. If you're finding this video powerful, type 1 below. If not, type 0. Your voice keeps Emily's memory alive, and it helps this channel keep uncovering the truths buried in silence. By February 2007, just 14 months after Emily Harper vanished into that snowbound night, the urgency of the search had drained away. The files at the Monroe County Sheriff's Office grew thick with statements, maps, sonar scans, and unanswered questions. What once had been a high-priority case now sat in a metal filing cabinet labeled in cold black letters. Unsolved. Inactive. For the Harper family. That label was unbearable. When the deputy delivered the news, Carolyn Harper clutched the paper as if it were a death sentence. Her daughter's life, reduced to a bureaucratic phrase, missing person, foul play suspected. Those words offered no answers, no closure, just a confirmation that the system was moving on while the family remained frozen in the past. The psychological toll was crushing. Each evening, Carolyn walked to the front window of her red brick home. She lit a single candle and placed it on the sill. The tiny flame flickered against the darkness outside, a signal to her daughter. We're waiting. We haven't forgotten. She repeated this ritual night after night, for years, even as neighbors quietly shook their heads, murmuring that it was time to let go. But Carolyn refused. That candle became both her defiance and her lifeline. Rachel, Emily's younger sister, coped differently. She refused to accept the sheriff's decision. Even after the case was cold, Rachel knocked on doors, drove back roads, and stopped by the bar where Emily had celebrated her birthday. She showed bartenders and waitresses the same faded photo, her voice trembling but insistent. "Do you remember her? Do you recall seeing a silver Pontiac that night?" Most shrugged. Some looked away, embarrassed by the persistence of a woman who couldn't move on. But for Rachel, persistence wasn't optional. It was the only way to keep Emily alive in people's minds. And then there was Emily's son, Alex. He grew up in the long shadow of absence. In elementary school, when classmates proudly waved at their mothers in the pickup line, Alex stood apart, his backpack slung loosely, eyes searching the horizon for a figure who never appeared. When asked by a teacher where his mom was, he would whisper, "She's missing," as though saying the words too loudly would make them more real. The silence in the Harper household was suffocating. Meals were eaten in half light, the empty chair at the table looming larger each year. Birthdays were marked not by celebration, but by a gnawing ache. Christmas stockings hung by the fireplace, one always left untouched, a painful reminder of who wasn't there. Bloomington, however, slowly moved on. The flyers weathered and tore, replaced by advertisements for yard sales and concerts. The vigils grew smaller. The prayers and Sunday services became fewer. For the community, Emily's story faded into a cautionary tale told only when another storm swept across the county roads. Drive safe. Remember the woman who vanished years ago. But for the Harpers, forgetting was impossible. Psychologists who study unresolved trauma often say that time doesn't heal in cases like this. It corrodes. Every passing day doesn't lessen the pain. It sharpens it. Because every day without answers reopens the wound. Carolyn lived in that state of suspended grief. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't the mother of someone who had left willingly. She was caught in limbo, unable to mourn, unable to move forward. Rachel carried guilt, wondering if she could have done something that night. Should she have insisted Emily stay at the bar longer? Should she have driven behind her? Survivor's guilt, psychologists note, is common among families of the missing. It eats at them, whispering, "If only you had done more." For Alex, the absence shaped his entire identity. Friends would ask him about his mom, and he would cut conversations short with 3 words. "She's missing." No explanation, no elaboration. Just a wall that shut out further questions. Childhood turned into adolescence, adolescence into young adulthood, all colored by that one unanswered mystery. Inside the sheriff's office, Emily's case number became one of hundreds on Indiana's cold case list. Deputies cycled through new investigations. Younger officers barely recognized her name. The silence was institutional as much as it was personal. Yet, in the world of true crime cases, silence itself often becomes evidence. A car doesn't disappear into nothing. A mother doesn't abandon her son without reason. When all else fails, the absence of evidence is its own clue, a reminder that someone, somewhere, worked hard to erase it. Rachel tried to harness that thought. She posted on early online forums, pleading for tips. She mailed letters to local news stations. She even wrote to the governor's office, asking why her sister's case wasn't receiving more attention. Most replies were curt, sympathetic but non-committal. "We're sorry for your loss." It felt like society itself had abandoned Emily. For Carolyn, the spiritual weight grew heavier. She stood in front of her congregation at First United Methodist Church, voice trembling as she begged for prayers. "Please pray for Emily," she said. "She would never leave her family. God will guide us to her." The congregation bowed their heads, but behind closed doors, whispers continued. "Maybe it's time to let go." Eights. That phrase, let go, was unbearable for the Harpers. Letting go felt like betrayal. Letting go meant Emily's memory would dissolve into the same silence that had swallowed her car. And so they resisted. The candle stayed lit. The questions stayed loud. The years crawled forward, but the Harpers remained trapped in 2005. Every holiday was another wound. Every birthday another reminder. The community's life went on, but in their home, time stood still. This psychological limbo is what makes cold cases some of the most excruciating of all true crime stories. Without closure, families cycle endlessly between hope and despair. One moment, they imagine a miraculous return. The next, they're haunted by visions of foul play. That instability can fracture families, erode mental health, and consume decades. Imagine being Carolyn, staring out of the same window every night, the flame of a candle reflecting back at her, hoping against hope that one day she'd see headlights in the driveway. Imagine being Rachel, knocking on yet another door, bracing herself for another dismissive shrug, another dead end. Imagine being Alex, sitting silently in a classroom, watching other children run into their mother's arms, while his reality was only absence. By 2010, Emily's name was rarely mentioned in local news. By 2012, only anniversaries brought brief coverage. Each year, reporters would knock on the Harper door, asking for interviews. Carolyn always agreed, her eyes weary but determined. She believed airtime might spark a witness to come forward. But when the cameras left, silence always returned, heavier than before. Rachel began a family of her own, but even her happiest moments were shadowed by Emily's absence. At her wedding, when she lit a candle in Emily's memory, tears blurred her vows. At the birth of her child, she whispered her sister's name, knowing Emily would never meet her niece. Through it all, Bloomington carried on. New businesses opened, new tragedies struck, new generations grew up unaware of the woman who had once smiled from every missing flyer. But, for the Harpers, Emily was never just a headline. She was the center of their world, the missing piece in every photograph, the silence in every family gathering. And that is why her story matters. Because in the universe of true crime cases, justice delayed is not just a slogan, it is a lived reality for families left in the dark. Silence is often crueler than bad news. A body confirms the worst. An arrest offers hope. But silence? Silence steals decades, erodes faith, and leaves families to wonder forever. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Don't let Emily's story fade into the background like the torn flyers on Bloomington's utility poles. If you've followed true crime cases before, you know the danger of forgetting. So, hit like right now to keep her memory alive. And tell me in the comments. If you think this story is worth telling, type 1 below. If not, type 0. Your comments matter. They keep the flame lit. They remind the world that Emily Harper's case is not just a file in a cabinet, but a wound that demands healing. See? By early 2023, nearly 18 years after Emily Harper's disappearance, the file bearing her name sat thick with dust in the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. The ink on the reports had faded, the photographs curled at the edges, and the word inactive stamped across the folder seemed final. But history has a way of surprising even the most resigned families. That January, Thomas Gallagher was sworn in as Monroe County's new prosecutor. A middle-aged lawyer with a reputation for pushing criminal justice reform, Gallagher had built his career on a simple conviction. No family should wait decades for the truth. At his very first press conference, he announced a bold initiative: Every unsolved case in the county would be reviewed. And at the top of the list was the disappearance of Emily Harper. His words carried across Bloomington like a shockwave. Reporters scribbled furiously. Residents leaned closer to their televisions. And in one modest red brick home, Carolyn and Rachel Harper burst into tears. After so many years of silence, someone in power was finally speaking their daughter's name again. Gallagher's first step was assembling a cold case task force. The team included Monroe County detectives, Indiana State Police investigators, and a nonprofit group known as Midwest Recovery Volunteers, a team of veteran divers and engineers specializing in underwater search technology. They rolled into Bloomington in the spring, their trucks loaded with side-scan sonar units, underwater drones, and powerful magnets designed to detect metal hidden deep beneath mud. For residents, the sight was surreal. 18 years had passed since the frantic dives of 2005, when men in heavy neoprene had plunged into Lake Monroe with only flashlights and ropes. This time, the technology was decades ahead. The sonar could produce razor-sharp images of the lakebed, almost like X-rays through the water. Remote-operated vehicles could slip into crevices too narrow for human divers, cameras capturing every detail in 4K clarity. The Harpers watched from the shoreline as the volunteers launched their boats. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself, trembling with cautious hope. Carolyn clutched Emily's photo close to her chest, whispering prayers into the wind. For them, this wasn't a technical operation. It was the possibility of finally bringing Emily home. Meanwhile, Gallagher turned his attention to the digital side of the investigation. In 2005, cell phone technology had been primitive. Records were limited to basic tower pings, barely useful for tracking movement. But Gallagher secured a court order to retrieve old AT&T logs from that night. With modern software, technicians reconstructed a digital map of Bloomington on December 10, 2005. Each ping was plotted with precision that investigators 2 decades earlier could only dream of. The results were staggering. Emily's phone had pinged as expected, at the bar, then the gas station, then heading south toward Lake Monroe. But another phone, belonging to Mark Reynolds, had moved almost in lockstep with hers. Reynolds, a respected deacon at First Baptist Church and a volunteer firefighter, had been questioned briefly in 2005 but dismissed for lack of evidence. He claimed he had been home all night. Without hard data to challenge him, police had let it slide. Now, the logs told a different story. The red dots on the digital map pulsed side by side. Emily's Nokia and Mark's cell phone traveled the same route, passed the same towers, lingered near the same lake shore for 40 minutes, the exact time investigators believed her car entered the water. In a closed-door meeting, Gallagher pointed at the glowing screen. "This isn't coincidence," he told his team. "This is shadowing." He was following her. Eights. Then came another breakthrough. Investigators pulled the grainy VHS footage from the Marathon gas station. For years, the tape had shown little more than blurred shapes, Emily's Pontiac pulling away, headlights dissolving into snow. But with digital enhancement software, the images sharpened. Behind Emily's car, just barely visible, appeared the silhouette of a red Chevrolet Silverado, a truck with distinctive taillights common in the early 2000s. Records showed Mark Reynolds owned that exact model. The picture was coming into focus. Gallagher leaned forward in his chair, his jaw tight. "We've got a respected church deacon, a man who wore the mask of heroism, standing in our community for nearly 20 years, while the evidence shows he was with Emily the night she vanished." Eights. The realization chilled everyone in the room. And here, the story cuts deeper than forensic data. Because it wasn't just about a man lying to police or hiding behind a false alibi. It was about the psychology of predators who wear hero masks. Mark Reynolds wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was a neighbor, a volunteer firefighter who rushed into burning barns, a deacon who read scripture from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. He baptized children. He prayed with grieving families. He organized potluck dinners. To the town of Bloomington, he was the kind of man people trusted blindly. But behind that mask, evidence suggested, was something far darker. What if the man leading prayers beside you for years was hiding the darkest secret of all? That question sent shivers down the spines of everyone who heard it. It forces you to look around your own life, your own community, and wonder, how well do we really know the people we trust? Rachel wrestled with that betrayal. She remembered sitting just 2 pews behind Mark during services, listening to him sing hymns, never once imagining he might be connected to her sister's disappearance. Carolyn remembered shaking his hand during church potlucks, thanking him for organizing fire safety drives. To realize now that those hands may have pushed Emily's car into the lake was almost too much to bear. Psychologists explain this as the mask of normalcy. Many predators craft an image so trustworthy, so embedded in community life, that suspicion never falls on them. They thrive on that camouflage. And for years, Reynolds had worn his mask flawlessly. The investigation pressed forward. Divers scoured Lake Monroe grid by grid, sonar humming, screens filled with black and white streaks like ghostly X-rays. Each time a car-shaped shadow appeared, hope surged. Each time divers surfaced empty-handed, despair returned. But Gallagher refused to quit. He met with reporters, his voice resolute. "We've waited 18 years. A few more months is nothing if it means giving this family justice." His words struck a chord in Bloomington. People who had long stopped talking about Emily's case began whispering again, watching news updates, gathering at the lake shore to see the search unfold. The weight of nearly 2 decades pressed on everyone. Residents remembered that snowy night, headlights vanishing into the storm. Now, the truth was surfacing in fragments. Digital dots, sharpened images, sonar sweeps. The picture of Mark Reynolds was forming not as a hero, but as a man who had lived alongside them while concealing a monstrous secret. And here's the part that keeps viewers like you leaning closer. Because in the landscape of true crime cases, these are the stories that disturb us most. Not random acts of violence by strangers, but betrayals by the very people communities trust. When a deacon, a firefighter, a neighbor turns out to be a suspect, it shakes the foundation of faith itself. The Harpers braced themselves for what was coming. They had endured years of silence, years of cruel rumors that Emily had run away. Now, the truth was clawing its way out of the water and the past. But truth comes with its own kind of terror. Would justice heal them, or wound them all over again? Before we push further into the discoveries that would shatter Bloomington's illusions, I want to know what you think. Should communities be quicker to question those we put on pedestals? Or is trust too vital to tear apart? Drop your thoughts below. If you believe Emily's case proves that justice can never be ignored, type 1 in the comments. If you're not convinced, type 0. Your voice matters, because stories like this don't just belong to the past, they shape how we protect our future. After weeks of sonar sweeps, endless false alarms, and hope rising only to collapse again, the team at Lake Monroe finally caught something different. It was the afternoon of June 9th, 2023. The sky hung heavy with gray clouds, the surface of the lake still as glass. On the sonar screen appeared a shape unlike the fallen trees and rusted scrap that had fooled them before. This object was boxy, 15 feet long, with sharp, angular lines. Jeff, the sonar operator, leaned closer, his voice low but certain. "This looks like a car." "Eights." On the shoreline, Rachel gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white. Carolyn clutched Emily's photo so tightly the frame dug into her hands. Gallagher's jaw tightened. He had waited months for this moment, and now every second felt unbearable. The team lowered an ROV camera, its yellow light piercing through murky water. The footage was grainy at first. Then the shape emerged, algae-covered curves, the roofline of a sedan. As the camera panned across the front, the Pontiac logo glimmered faintly beneath 18 years of silt. Rachel burst into sobs. Her hand clapped over her mouth. Carolyn nearly collapsed against Gallagher, whispering, "My girl, we've found her." Eights. What the lake had swallowed in 2005, it was finally giving back. Within hours, a salvage crane was brought to the site. Massive steel cables were lowered into the water, wrapping around the frame. The crowd on shore, reporters, neighbors, volunteers, watched in tense silence. The winch groaned. Water boiled and churned. Mud rose in thick clouds. And then, with a sound like the earth itself exhaling, the silver Pontiac Grand Am broke the surface. Water gushed from its windows. Algae clung to its frame. But the car was unmistakable. The vehicle Bloomington had whispered about for nearly 2 decades was finally back in daylight. Technicians rushed forward, sealing the area with yellow tape, erecting tents and floodlights. The Harpers were asked to step back, but their eyes never left the car. For years, cruel rumors had suggested Emily left willingly, that her disappearance was her choice. But now, seeing her belongings still inside, her handbag, her phone, scraps of fabric, the family knew she had not abandoned them. She had been taken. Forensic teams moved with precision. On the rear bumper, they scraped away a layer of algae and mud to reveal a patch of red paint. Samples confirmed it wasn't from Emily's car. It was transfer, collision evidence. Investigators matched the shade to Victory Red, a paint used exclusively on early 2000s Chevrolet Silverados. It was the exact color of Mark Reynolds' truck. Next, technicians examined the undercarriage. Rusted steel cable was tangled around the suspension. Its twisted fibers suggested it had once been part of a towing mechanism or winch. The scratches running parallel along the car's belly revealed the truth. Emily's Pontiac hadn't simply skidded into the lake. It had been dragged. Inside the trunk lining, microscopic analysis uncovered foreign fibers. They matched material from the bed of a Silverado, further proof that Emily's car had been in direct contact with Reynolds' truck. Piece by piece, the evidence eliminated all doubt. And then came the human testimony. Kevin Miller, a bartender from the night of Emily's birthday, came forward with a memory he had once dismissed. He recalled seeing Emily and Mark at the bar, voices raised, Emily in tears, telling him, "Stop following me." She stormed out, and Mark trailed close behind. Back in 2005, Kevin hadn't thought much of it. Now, paired with the digital pings in the car in the lake, it was damning. Then Gloria Sanders, who lived near the quarry south of Bloomington, shared what she had heard that same night. A truck engine roaring past 1A, M, followed by the metallic whine of a winch and the splash of something heavy hitting water. At the time, she thought it was kids fooling around. Now, 18 years later, It lined up perfectly with the cell tower data that placed Mark's phone at Lake Monroe for 40 long minutes. With the Pontiac on land, paint transfer analyzed, cable examined, fibers matched, and witnesses revisited, the case transformed. What had been a mystery for nearly 2 decades was no longer about speculation. It was about murder. Gallagher convened his team in a late-night meeting. On the table lay the photographs. The recovered Pontiac dripping with algae, the scraped paint sample, the rusted cable coiled in a bag, the old VHS frame showing Mark's Silverado trailing Emily's car. Around them, silence pressed in, heavy. "This is no accident," Gallagher said firmly. "This is a deliberate act. 18 years ago, Mark Reynolds followed Emily Harper, dragged her car into Lake Monroe, and tried to bury the truth." "Eights." The detectives nodded grimly. For so long, they had spoken of Emily's case as an enigma, a ghost story. Now it had a perpetrator, a method, and a motive. In Bloomington, news of the Pontiac's recovery spread like wildfire. Television screens showed the haunting image of the silver car being lifted from the lake, water streaming from its windows. Headlines blared. "Car missing for 18 years. Pulled from Lake Monroe." For the Harpers, the revelation was a paradox, both knife and balm. They wept at the confirmation that Emily had not left them. But they also wept for the cruelty of what had been done to her, and for the long years stolen by silence. And for the community, shock set in. The man they had prayed beside, the firefighter who saved lives, now stood exposed as the likely killer who had hidden behind his mask of decency. In the history of true crime cases, this was the moment the narrative shifted. No longer a disappearance, no longer speculation. It was a crime scene, hidden for nearly 2 decades beneath the waters of Lake Monroe. Psychologists describe such breakthroughs as a truth shock. For years, uncertainty becomes its own reality. Families adapt to silence. Communities adjust to mystery. But when truth surfaces, it shatters that fragile balance. Relief collides with rage. Closure collides with grief. Rachel described it best in an interview with a local station. Standing by the shore, eyes swollen from tears, she said, "We begged for answers. The lake kept its secret, but today it finally spoke." Eights. If you believe the lake truly spoke after 18 years, type justice in the comments right now. And while you're here, help us measure how much this story grips you. If you think this case deserves every second of attention, drop a 1 below. If not, type 0. Your voice keeps Emily's memory alive, and it keeps us pushing forward to uncover more truths. Because the story isn't over. The Pontiac may have surfaced, but what it revealed was only the beginning of a battle for justice. And the man who wore a hero's mask for nearly 2 decades was about to face the consequences. The Pontiac's recovery had turned whispers into evidence, and evidence into action. Within days, Gallagher and his team finalized the probable cause affidavit. The judge reviewed the chain of forensic proof, paint transfer, cable marks, fibers, and witness testimony, and signed the arrest warrant. On the morning of June 18th, 2023, Bloomington gathered at First Baptist Church as it had for decades. The bells rang steady, children played on the lawn, and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. No one expected the morning service to end in a scene that would haunt the community forever. Mark Reynolds pulled up in his familiar red Silverado, still dressed in his volunteer firefighter uniform. To those around him, He was the same trusted man who had led prayers, saved homes, and organized charity drives. But as he stepped from his truck, the wail of sirens shattered the calm. 3 patrol cars screeched into the parking lot, boxing him in. SWAT officers in black vests poured out, rifles lowered but ready. A megaphone blared across the churchyard. "Mark Reynolds, you are under arrest by order of the Monroe County Court. Put your hands up now." "Eights!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Parents clutched their children. Elderly parishioners clung to canes, eyes wide with disbelief. Mark froze, his face drained of color. He shook his head as if to dismiss the nightmare. "There must be some mistake," he muttered. But there was no mistake. Officers moved swiftly, spinning him around, securing his wrists with cold steel handcuffs. The metallic click echoed across the church steps, a sound far louder than the hymns that usually filled the air. Parishioners wept openly. Some shouted in anger, demanding answers. Others stood paralyzed, unable to reconcile the image of the man who baptized their children with the reality of a murder suspect. The fracture in the community was immediate and deep. Trust, once blind and absolute, had been ripped apart in seconds. For the Harper family, news of the arrest brought a complex wave of emotions. Rachel cried uncontrollably, her body shaking with years of pent-up grief and rage. "We waited 18 years to see him in cuffs," she told reporters later. "It doesn't erase the pain, but at least Emily has a voice now." Carolyn, standing beside her, clutched Emily's photo tightly. For her, it was not victory. It was confirmation of what she had known in her bones all along. Emily had never abandoned them. She had been taken. The community, however, was devastated. Some felt betrayed to their core. "He prayed with us every Sunday while Emily lay at the bottom of the lake." One parishioner sobbed. Others resisted the reality, insisting Mark was innocent until proven guilty. Divisions cut through neighborhoods, congregations, even families. Psychologists would later describe the moment as a collective trauma. When a trusted figure is unmasked, it does more than shock. It destabilizes the very fabric of belief. For Bloomington, Mark's arrest was not just about one man. It was about the collapse of certainty, the reminder that evil can wear the face of a hero. As Mark was led into the waiting patrol car, cameras zoomed in on his pale face. He tried to maintain composure, but his trembling hands betrayed him. The image dominated the evening news. The firefighter deacon, handcuffed on the steps of his own church. That day would be remembered in Bloomington as Dark Sunday, the morning the bells rang, not for worship, but for justice. The summer sun dipped low over Lake Monroe, its surface shimmering in gold. Along the shore, a small crowd gathered, family, friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed Emily Harper's story for years. A portrait of Emily, her warm smile frozen in time, rested on a wooden stand surrounded by lilies and candles. Carolyn, frail but resolute, held a microphone. Her voice trembled but carried. For 18 years, we lived in silence. Now the truth has risen from this water. My daughter did not leave us. She was taken. But today, she is remembered. Tears streaked faces across the gathering. Rachel placed her hand on her mother's shoulder, while Alex, now a young man, set a bouquet of white flowers gently at the water's edge. The blooms floated outward, a final message. Emily would never sink into forgotten darkness again. The memorial was not just for Emily. It was for every family caught in the endless ache of a cold case. Technology had made the difference: sonar mapping, digital forensics, and restored VHS footage. But persistence, the refusal of a mother and sister to surrender, had carried this case through nearly 2 decades. Together, they proved that silence can be broken, and truth, no matter how long buried, will surface. And so, the story of Emily Harper closes here, on the water that once hid her, now reflecting her memory. Before you leave, ask yourself, did justice come too late for Emily? Or was it her family's unyielding love that made justice possible at all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe for more true crime cases where silence is shattered and the truth finally surfaces.